I mean, because publishing your first book, writing what you want to write in the way you want to write it is anyway quite a difficult job, as you know, Ian. And then to move on from that to writing again in a way that necessarily, I mean, doesn't repeat what you've written earlier. Not because it's bad form to repeat, but because you can't function. I mean, there's just many situations in which you can't function creatively. So you cannot go back to a previous mode of writing. You have to move on, even if it disappoints you and your readers. So on top of all these kind of tussles, to actually think about readers in Ballygunge and Islington, I mean, if I were to do that, it would completely block up my, I would not be able to write.
Right.
But having said that, I mean, there are moments when I've thought about these audiences. Asked to write essays for the Telegraph edit page after I moved back to India in 1999. I thought, writing for an audience, whatever audience I might have in Sunny Park or Ballygunge or North Calcutta or wherever in Bengal, presents me with a slightly different opportunity than writing for The Guardian or the London Review of Books. And I was aware of that fact. And the way it manifested itself was that I wrote about just about anything I felt like. Very, very trivial, inconsequential things.
Right. Because you're quite nerveless, I think, about this, really, because in this new and very fine book, you have inexplicable references to anybody who lived in Islington, London, N5, as I do. Fortunately, I'd heard you say she bought her biscuits from the cookie jar.
Yeah, okay.
And you simply expect people to take it for granted that you won't need to explain. And indeed you don't, of course you don't. We understand the cookie jar is a well-known South Calcutta biscuit shop. But that's kind of nerveless. It's really kind of amazing that most writers would stop. Nerveless. I mean, you've done it without kind of worrying about it, whereas most writers would fret about that.
You know, the reason I do that is because I'm very moved by sounds in writing. It goes back to my original love of poetry. And in poetry, you really don't have the time and space to say, she bought the biscuits from cookie jar, within brackets. Because you're depending on scansion, you're depending on rhythm, you know? And you're bringing in cookie jar not only as information, but because of the sound of those words in a poem, you know? So if you look at the poems, early poems by T.S. Eliot, where he's making all kinds of rather nasty references to people and places because of his kind of general disaffection with the world and his anti-Semitic propensities as well. I mean, many of them are Jewish figures, but he doesn't actually explain in brackets what's kind of making him so anxious. And that's partly because there's great power in those words.
Yes.
And I think you reduce the as you would reduce a line in a poem, you reduce the sentence, which to me, not just for kind of fancy aesthetic reasons, is a very important thing. You reduce the power of that if you begin to detract from its living quality, the living quality of the words that you've chosen for various reasons, not just one reason, that is to give out information. So which is why I would want readers to be happy, as I have been, to be in a state of partial ignorance, if necessary, such as Keats said of negative capability in a writer. You know, no irritable reaching after fact and reason all the time. He says of Shakespeare. The writer he admires is the writer capable of negative capability, that is, of being in a state of indecision or not properly knowing. And I would want that from the reader as well.
That's probably the opposite of an editorial sensibility, who's always searching for fact and reason. But I completely take the point. When you first began to write, how did you kind of arrive at the subject of South Calcutta, really? It wouldn't be unfair to describe most of your work to be set in quite a precise geographical area.
Yeah, three of my 5 novels are set in Calcutta, and one non-fiction book.
And one novel in Mumbai?
One in Bombay and the other in Oxford.
In Oxford, right.
Yeah.
So how did you just thought this is what I have to write about? Because you didn't grow up in South Calcutta. In fact, had you grown up there, it might not have been what you chose to write about.
No, I always wrote about a boy who was visiting, which is why at the end of the book of Calcutta, 2 years in the city, I say my books, even when they've not been about Calcutta, have been about visits. You know, and the visit. Well, my books have been about places. They have been about ordinariness within those places. I mean, so nothing exceptional happens within those places, and that's the subject of my writing. The fact that nothing exceptional happens, but the visit to the place is transformative in some ways. So everything that is humdrum around you during a visit seems slightly strange. To me, the quality of strangeness in literature is the quality. This is what I look for. This is what I am moved by. Even my first novel had the word strange in its title, A Strange and Sublime Address.
Yes.
Literature is a strange thing. I mean, which is why we don't talk about it in literature festivals or anywhere. Even Derrida, who's a great, Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher who is identified with, in sort of, in layman circles, with deconstruction and the fall of the literary, is being such an interesting writer himself, is very much a devotee and an advocate of literature. But in an interview he says, yes, literature is an institution, but it is a strange institution. He uses the word strange. The literary is a strange thing. So now going back to the whole business of the visit, you are by being in a different place, suddenly estranged from ordinary things. And that was right from the beginning my subject. As to why I wrote about Calcutta, it's because I used to visit here as a child. I was growing up in Bombay, I used to come here as a child. And the world over here in Bhawanipur in South Calcutta just seemed extremely different from the corporate Bombay in which I was growing up. Either on the 12th story of a house or, you know, on the 25th story of a building. So just a different perspective on existing in a neighborhood in the here and now, in the present moment, is what those visits to Calcutta gave me.
So when a critic says there's not enough incident in your books, you say, well, that's just too bad. This is the way I've chosen to write.
It's not that it's just too bad. It's that.
That's not the point.
I mean, the fact that there aren't incidents in a conventional sense, in the conventional sense given to us by novels and narratives, in the book, is part of two projects. Firstly, the project of making something out of nothing, which is something I've always been interested in, including the essays I wrote for the Telegraph. I wrote them about just anything under the sun. So the concern was always with, can writing convert anything into something that the imagination recognizes as interesting. So the project of making something out of nothing, and also it's not incident that I was looking for, but the meanings of ordinary things being slightly changed and becoming off kilter. Incident now, you know, Paul Valéry, the French poet, is quoted by Roland Barthes when he talks about the way novels always begin. He says, Valéry says, and Barthes is quoting this, novels always begin with a sentence like, the Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock. It's always the simple past tense, and it begins with such what might say an incident leading to further incidents. The Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock. So Barthes says that this is the unreal time of histories and novel writing, which he says suppresses the trembling of existence. I have no idea what he means by trembling of existence, but I have a vague sort of inkling that that the Marchioness went out at 5 o'clock is the sort of novel that I don't want to write.
You don't want to read it?
No.
It was a dark and stormy night. You don't fancy that? Coming back to your book on Calcutta, it's structured over, I suppose, the central event in it. It does have an event in it. The central event in it is the loss to Mamata Banerjee, sorry, the victory of Mamata Banerjee in the elections in 2011, yeah, and the disappearance of the CPM. Now, in this book, you use a phrase which is very striking to me when you describe how Calcutta has lost what you say is the kind of enervating humanism. Is that, if I remember that properly? It's the enervating humanism of the Marxist Party and the upper class. Why was it enervating? Why was it?
It was seen to be enervating by people over here, including the Marxists. When I say humanism, I mean the culture of the Bhadralok. You know, the bourgeoisie that came into its own by the mid-19th century and produced this astonishing city. The bourgeoisie being the common man in a different way from the Aam Aadmi Party. You know, a kind, not the man on the street maybe, but also he was on the street. Wearing his kind of chappals and with his umbrella, and in this new kind of costume, the dhuti Punjabi, which was given a new inflection over here in this city. That is, it was no longer a rural costume, very much an urban cosmopolitan kind of attire. Now, by the 70s, that the legacy of that humanism was seen to be an enervating one, and members of the Communist Party, like Jyoti Bose and Buddhadev Bhattacharya, his successor, who might kind of belong to slightly different castes and even slightly different classes, nevertheless were products of that Bhadralok kind of culture, and they had turned against it. They still went around wearing that dhuti and Punjabi, and when they felt like it, claimed that Bhadralok lineage for themselves. Because I remember Jyoti Basu saying to Rajiv Gandhi, "You and I are gentlemen." You know? Yes. And that was Basu speaking as a Bhadralok. But by the 70s, I think the Bhadralok had enough of the Bhadralok, which is why I speak about the enervating legacy.
Right. So, but humanism presumably is transferable to different parties. It's not just the privilege of the CPM.
And the CPM was humanistic in spite of itself. I mean, one of its humanistic legacies might be its professed secular legacy, which many will contest, I'm sure. Many people who hear me say that will say that it wasn't actually as secular a party as it made itself out to be. But in some of its features, it was humanistic. In others, it was deeply and childishly against everything that was Bhadralok about its past. And this is still true of much of the Bengali left, that there's a kind of, that the Bengali Bhadralok suffers from a sort of reflexive tick against the Bhadralok past.
I see. You mean a shame, a landlord past, or I mean, is there a sense of shame there?
It's not even just a landlord past, because many of the Bhadralok were no longer landlords. I mean, you see the rise in India of a middle class, and you see it in the Bhadralok, all comprising people who live in rented accommodations, accommodation, unlike, let's say, their Pakistani counterparts, and who no longer own property, let alone land. So many Bhadralok lived all their life in rented accommodation. So it's not landed people that we're necessarily talking about, but we are talking about a particular kind of, not a homogeneous understanding of the world. So when you say Bhadralok, people immediately think of one way of looking at things, of one legacy. But I think there are several kind of aspects to this Bhadralok legacy. But from the point of view of today, when you look back, it looks elite, it looks in the worst possible way rather than in an interesting way, marginal, irrelevant, all of that.
And quite hard to find, I find now as well, in Calcutta, people who are
hard to find anywhere. Sometimes I might be sort of in a car going to Santoshpur and have lost my way, and I ask somebody for directions. And a person of great refinement, who obviously isn't very well-to-do or anything anymore and is going to die in another 10 years, says to me, would you go down that way and then turn right, in tones which makes me realize that, oh, this is one of the Bhadralok I used to see when I was a child.
Right.
But there aren't that many of them left anymore.
Right. In your book, you also say that if Bombay is about money and Delhi is about power, that Calcutta is about parents.
Yeah, Calcutta is about, are you eating at home at night? I mean, this came out of a conversation that I was having with actually one of the people who has traditionally taken part in this festival as an interlocutor, a man called Shandip Roy. Shandip Roy was a person, was a Bengali who lived in, I think, in San Francisco or New York, I can't remember which city in America. And he just moved back to Calcutta shortly before the elections, which I describe over here. And he's a journalist, and he had moved back for a reason similar to mine. He was the only child of an aging mother. And he wanted to interview me for some channel or some website about the elections. So then as we were having this conversation, we then began to kind of taxonomize the cities. And I fell back on cliche and I said, of course, yeah, Bombay is about money, Delhi is about power, Calcutta is about, and I stopped short because certainly it's no longer about cultural hegemony or whatever. So I said, what is Calcutta? And he said, Calcutta is about, are you going to eat at home at night? And I thought, of course, I mean, this is exactly what Calcutta is about. So I put that in the book. I thought, I mean, he had really hit
some nice things about the book.
Yeah.
One of the surprising things about the book, and also surprising things about you, given your slender frame, is the amount of food that's in it, including an amazingly good disquisition, I think, on cheesecake. And picking up a book about Calcutta, I expect to read lots of sentimental passages about Rashgulla and so on. But no, Rashgulla never mentioned.
Rashgulla is for another Calcutta book. I mean, one to be written in the future.
But cheesecake is there.
Cheesecake
How
is
did
there.
and chefs are there.
Yeah,
Calcutta chefs.
There's one chapter devoted to chefs, Italian chefs in Calcutta, and to well, I mean, I wasn't sure whether I should put something as frivolous as Italian chefs and cheesecake into a book about Calcutta, but then I decided I would go ahead and write that chapter. And that chapter, I think, is in some oblique way about the new India coming to Calcutta. So I do spend a chapter or a chapter and a half about shopping malls and Italian chefs and cheesecake. And as I said, I mean, you do get almost everything now in India, like cheesecake, except that you're not sure whether it's really cheesecake or not. So that's what I was trying to kind of figure out. Is it actually important that it is not cheesecake in the new India? I mean, people, as long as people are making money out of cheesecake and people are eating cheesecake and celebrating the fact that they're eating cheesecake in the new India in a shopping mall, does it matter that it's not actually cheesecake? Is the question that I...
And by your account, the fact that it hasn't been cheesecake, in your understanding of cheesecake, until recently because of the shortage of Philadelphia cheese.
That's what the chefs told me. I asked them, why can't you produce authentic cheesecake? They said, we don't have Philadelphia cheese. It seemed like a frivolous conversation to be having, writing about a great city of modernity, but you know, it was, but in a certain way it interested me, this whole business of, you know, because I also mentioned the fact that, yes, I do fall prey to my appetites at times, and I don't behave in as radical a way as I should be. So I have been hungry in Bombay and gone off, say, standing in front of the Gateway of India, have rushed off with my wife into the Taj to eat, to maybe have a cup of tea there. And then once, while having that cup of tea, noticed ginger pudding was on the menu, as I mentioned.
I was going to come
and this is another kind of feature of the new India. So I asked for, and ginger pudding, like cheesecake, is actually not fancy food in the West, as you know. And ginger pudding especially is kind of stodge. but it's lovely starch. So I had eaten ginger pudding as a child, and I thought, fantastic, they have ginger pudding. Can I have some ginger pudding? Although it was 6 o'clock in the evening or whatever. And he said, he brought me, it was early January, he brought me Christmas pudding, and I hate Christmas pudding. So I said, excuse me, and I've recorded my terrible behavior. Anita Desai says I was very badly behaved in this particular section.
She was quite tyrannical, I have to say.
Very, yeah. And so I said, excuse me, this is not Christmas pudding, it is not ginger pudding, what you've given me is Christmas pudding. And the man was extremely wounded because no one says things like that in the New India. And he took it back and he brought me another plate and it was Christmas pudding again. And he said, this is ginger pudding. So I said, excuse me, you've actually given me Christmas pudding again. Now, then the manager came and said, actually, we've run out of ginger pudding. What it made me begin to think is, does it matter actually that as long as we think we're having ginger pudding in the New India, does it matter if we are not?
Well, if you dislike,
it seemed like a question worth asking.
It's a reasonable question,
Yeah.
but if you dislike puddings made with raisins and things, then it's
That's
reasonable to
now
dislike.
That's your editorial side, looking at the more
Yes,
kind
yes,
of
yes.
sort of material side of the whole ginger pudding question. Yeah.
Which we didn't expect to be discussing, but I thought I should just bring it up. Would you? This is the question that Calcuttans get. Well, they love answering, but you may not love answering this question. Are you distressed by its condition?